The impact of trauma on adolescents, you know all this. This is just so it's in a slide in case you need to pull it up. But trauma impacts all parts of an adolescence, in relationships, regulating mood, controlling behavior, thinking through solutions, developing a positive self-concept. The thing is, what happens with traumatized adolescents is they tend to solve problems by developing a view of the world that incorporates their betrayal and hurt. And it's also, you know, this is almost word for word for what the study I read last night. These slides were done maybe 6 weeks ago, about the ACEs study. The researcher I was reading in the ACEs study said what ACEs demonstrates is that hurt people hurt people. And that's what we're saying here. That adolescents, if adolescents especially are more traumatized adolescents, if they have a worldview that this is how people treat each other and this is how I'm to be treated and this is what I deserve, then that's how they see the world. And we can say, oh, Gordon, you're wrong. I can say, like you know. Which is kind of what our kids do, right? Because we're kind of going in the wrong door with that. Traumatized adolescents avoid emotional experiences, including positive ones. Why are the positive ones difficult and painful as well for a really traumatized, heavily traumatized adolescent?
Sometimes they feel like they're not worthy of the positives.
They're not worthy of the positives, or what happens is the positive experience comes in and it challenges this worldview. And as sucky, can I say that word? As my worldview may look to you, it's the one I know. There's comfort in this pain because I know how to deal with this pain. And now you're saying something positive, and that's a little scary. Because I don't have, remember we talked earlier, inner scaffolding? I don't have scaffolding that says, this is how I hold good stuff. I am wired to deal with the down and dirty, and you know what? I don't deal with it badly, I'm still here. But I don't have the wiring to deal with that. So that's a little scary. So you know what's going to be better to avoid it, to play it off. Or to do, you know, if we had a lot more time when we get into this, but to do about keeping it out there and saying, I really don't know how I did this good thing. I mean, you said I did it, but I think it's kind of luck. And it has to do with really locus of control. Do we feel our locus of control is within us or outside of us? Our educational system is built on the fact that we're supposed to internalize that, except traumatized kids don't. They don't internalize that they can make things happen because that is overwhelming for them. Because their energy is so focused on scanning the environment.
Self-protection.
They have to protect themselves. What other choice do they have? I mean, if I don't protect me, who's going to protect me? Well, we know what happens when kids say to themselves, I can't protect me. What happens to kids who say, I can't protect me? We have a name for it. We call it failure to thrive. And those kids die. So any child, no matter how horrendous their environment, somehow has a message in their head they can take care of themselves. Or they would have given it up. If you want an interesting book, and I'm always giving out books that are really not around mental health, but there's an oldie but a goodie, I think it got the Pulitzer in the 80s, called The Tin Drum. It's about a child who is born in pre-World War II Germany and decides around age 2 he's not going to grow up because all adults are crazy, and about how he sees the world and the world sees him. But he makes this conscious choice to not join them because it's not safe and they're all nuts. And so he stays the size of a 2 or 3-year-old. So it's a fascinating book about perspective shift. But that to him was safer than joining what felt really scary. So, and we know kids use alcohol and drugs because they're traumatized. But why they're using the alcohol and drugs is they really are trying to regulate their mood, which is, as we saw earlier, not regulated because of the trauma, not regulated because they're being triggered. So they'll take things in, and we'll look at that when I have 12 principles of healing from trauma I developed, as a way of dealing with that. But this is how I am dealing with my trauma. I'm just not going to be there. I'm going to get high. I'm not going to be there. And you know what? For that period of time, it may be the first 10 minutes that I'm drinking, and I'll be chasing it all night and the next morning. But I'm going to keep chasing it because that feels better than where I am. Adolescents come to expect trauma, and they respond with, defeat, aggression, freezing, this disassociation. This terrible incident we heard in Afghanistan about this wonderful person who was a family man and always had a smile on his face, and he's accused of this atrocity, and he's saying he doesn't remember. My guess is he disassociated. In fact, I can't diagnose anyone who's not in front of me, and even then, believe me, I struggle. But it sounds like classic post-traumatic stress disorder. And he was triggered. And he may have drank a little, maybe he drank a beer in the book. My book will be popular with some people and be really unpopular with other people. Because one of the things I speak about is the triggering mechanism that can happen with even small amounts of alcohol. Because when we drink to relax. And what does that mean? What do we move away from in our brain when we want to drink? Our cortex, we move away from our thinking brain. So we go into more of our reactive brain. And if something is in our environment which is potentially triggering to us, and we've had that glass of wine, then we have that much less to deal with the trigger because we don't have our thinking processes. So I really recommend that people who are dealing with trauma don't drink. I know it's going to be so popular out there. That's why I haven't had a bestseller. I say all these things and people say, nah. Healing experiences help to deal with triggers. Healing experiences can rewire the brain. We know the brain is rewiring all the time. We also know people even as old as me can rewire our brain. It's slower, it takes more exposures, it's harder to do. They say learning a language, it's much easier to do it earlier than to do it later, but it's still possible. Reparative experiences and restorative experiences. Restorative are having new positive experiences. Reparative experiences are learning self-soothing techniques. One of the things that really has propelled me is working with the adolescents I worked with and realizing I had some self-soothing techniques to teach them. I didn't have enough. I now have more. And hopefully, if you start thinking this way, you will develop more. I think there's an infinite number of them out there. But kids who've been traumatized need to learn how to self-soothe. And we need, as adults, to figure out how to give them new positive experiences. I mean, they can figure it out, but it used to be we used to put kids in care at residential treatment facilities. For what reason? What was our big reason in the 80s for putting kids in care?
Keep them safe, get them in a structured environment, get them in a more positive environment where they can be noticed and cared for properly.
Right, corrective emotional experiences. If it worked as well as we had hoped it was going to work. Which is always iffy, even though we kept hoping. We all live in hope, right? Everyone in this room lives in hope, or you wouldn't be here. Keys to dealing with triggers is learning to avoid situations in which they may occur. I put this down knowing a lot of times we don't know when these triggers are going to occur. But we do know that they may occur in certain situations. And so these would be situations to avoid until we have learned how to deal with them, practiced desensitization. For example, do any of you know people who are afraid of flying? Do they avoid flying, or do they put themselves in an airplane a lot? They avoid it. So it's like it makes sense as a first level. If you know this is going to trigger you, like, don't do it for now. It's not don't do it forever, but don't do it for now. Staying sober, because we've talked about if you move away from the cortex, which you're thinking, into your feeling part of the brain, and we're going to be looking at this more as we go through this, that makes you less able to deal with the trigger. Desensitization and grounding techniques. What's desensitization? That's what I was going to ask.
Is being exposed to a situation to the point where it doesn't create that feeling anymore?
Right. It's increasing the exposure more and more so you're more comfortable. There are, for example, wonderful programs around getting people who are afraid to fly, you know, getting them in airports and then eventually on a plane and then they're off a plane and getting used to the smell on a plane and then they go off a plane and then eventually they're on a little flight and then they're off and then, you know, so it's desensitization. You can gradually do it and it's at more and more of a comfort level. There are certain things, though, people may not want to learn to be desensitized. I'm a co-founder with Ellen and Phil of an organization called NACOA, the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. When we were first being founded, there was another psychologist on the founding team called Herb Gravitz. And a loud pop went off and I jumped. And he said, wow, that was a big response. I said, yeah, it kind of sounded like, a shot. And he said, well, would you like to be less sensitive to that? And I thought about that, and I thought, no, because, kind of like where I grew up, responding to a shot was like a smart thing to do. I don't know if I wanted to be desensitized to that. Even though it means around things that sound like shots, I may have a bigger response than other people. But, it was a good one for me, where I grew up. So not everyone wants to be desensitized from whatever it is, but that is something. And then there's grounding. What's grounding? Focusing on the here and now, and that's where I'm so excited because I have so many more techniques to teach children and adults on how to focus in the here and now. Grounding techniques are really, I think, important in dealing with trauma, especially right after the trauma has happened, right after the trigger has occurred, to move in first with a grounding technique, and we'll be looking at this.